We're live, and this is Steve Ward, and welcome to Talent Attraction Channel. This week's Talent Attraction Channel, which we've confused everybody by putting on Tuesday. You can blame Lars for that, but that's all right. It really doesn't matter. So look, thanks everybody for joining, whether it's live or afterwards, because obviously this is available afterwards as well. This week we're going to look at employer branding, and we're going to look at the future of employer branding. It's a subject we've covered in part through this as a stream throughout the whole Talent Attraction Show series, but I wanted to focus one specifically on this subject and specifically on where we think this thing should be going. And so two people who know as much or more than anybody about this, and so I carefully handpicked, both come from the other side of the pond to me, are Stacey and Lars. So a quick wave to Stacey and Lars. I'll get them to introduce themselves shortly. Housekeeping stuff to keep the ball going. Look, if you're tweeting about it or doing anything on social media, we do have a hashtag. It's hashtag TAChannel. Apparently some people still use Twitter. So so for those who do, by all means, tweet over there. Also, if you want to ask a question, which I'd love you to do, because although I've got my own kind of structure for the show, I'd love it when we get some good questions on the right-hand side. The little section on the right-hand side there that you can see Stephen O'Donnell and co having some conversation on the right. And please ask questions there, not the one where it says question and answer at the bottom, because I will not see the one at the bottom just because of the way this thing is set up. Quick mention to Candidate ID, who are the sponsors of this webinar. Candidate ID are a company I'm an advisor and ambassador for, and they're the world's first automated talent pipelining software, and it rocks, frankly. And so if you haven't had a look at it, please do. Then it means that at least they get some kudos from the show. So but it is awesome. I highly recommend. So moving on, as Jim Stroud said, oh my god, it's Stacey, Zapars and Lars. So look, Stacey, ladies first, because that's the way it should be. Would you like to introduce yourself and you know, a little bit of a short potted history and where your passion with employer and speciality with employer branding kind of lies, basically, your love affair with employer branding?
Yeah, my name is Stacey. Thanks for having me. I am excited to be here with two people that I like very much. So this is going to be a fun time today. I have been recruiting for about 20 years and started my own consulting firm about 5 years ago. And I help companies build the best the best recruiting team possible. And so that's kind of what my company does through consulting and training and hiring the right people for their team. So just launched a new business called the Talent Agency, and it's for recruiting, basically, to kind of further that effort to help them get the best team built as possible. So as far as where does my passion with employer branding lie, I would say for me, it's really more around education and evangelism and less around sales and kind of false promises or getting people's hopes up or attracting more people. It's about attracting the right people, educating the right people on the culture and the work that's being done, and really just letting them see what it's really like so that the right people will be attracted to your company and the ones who will ultimately stick around and be successful and engaged. So for me, that's what gets me excited, is when I see education happening, not just selling.
Love it. Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Stacey. And Lars, same question. Same intro.
Yeah,
so I because you're a different person, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Stacey Zapar. So I come from the recruiting side of the house as well. I've been recruiting for 20 years. Most of that time I was running global recruiting teams for companies like Ticketmaster and Magento, and most recently NPR. Left NPR to start my own firm, Amplify, about 3.5 years ago, and we do strategic consulting around recruiting optimization and employer brand. And then I also kind of moonlight as the co-founder of HR Open Source, which was a global initiative I co-founded with Ambrosia Vertesi to really elevate the field of HR and recruiting. In terms of employer brand, like Stacey had a great answer. I think we're at a point now in employer brand's evolution, but it's really about it's not just talent attraction, it's the right talent attraction. And that means it's not just sizzle, it's warts, it's good, it's bad. It's a really kind of true view of what it's like to work at an organization to make sure you're getting the right people in that funnel. But what gets me really excited is actually the creative element of employer brand. I think we're getting to a point now in employer brand where we're getting much smarter about how we use tools and how we tell stories and how we leverage technology. And it's allowing us to be a true creative discipline. And so for somebody who spent
20 years in recruiting and has really seen how that field has evolved. The fact that we're firmly rooted as a creative space right now, to me, gets me really excited because it allows people to really use both sides of their brain and do some compelling stuff where, you don't know if you're seeing something that's coming from a marketing consumer brand agency or talent attraction employer brand. Like the quality is getting that good. And that part's really exciting to me.
Yeah, no, agreed. And then and recruiters, creative, seriously. I mean,
Yeah.
who thought that would ever happen?
Yeah, I mean, we're there. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's good, isn't it? And just as an intro to me, for those who don't know who I am, I'm Steve Ward. I've been recruiting for even longer than these guys have been recruiting, because I'm such an old fart. But I now work as a talent attraction strategist. I work with businesses on, again, attracting what both guys have just referred to, attracting the right people to the organization rather than just attracting people to the organization. And have a lot of fun doing that. And this subject as a whole is something that absolutely is a massive passion point of mine, because I just think the development of employer brand as a subject area, even if the different levels of execution are interesting and different and remarkable, I think it's changed the game of recruitment massively, and the way that direct hiring can happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I find that massively exciting. And I work with slightly smaller organizations who don't feel as though they have any brands, let alone an employer brand. And so it's quite fun to tell them what their employer brand is, or to work with them to work out what it is, because it's all of a sudden they start to attract people they never thought they could ever attract through smart use of it. So it's a great area, a subject area for me. So I'm looking forward to this one. So look, let's cut at where we are right now then. Lars, why don't you kick us off? But could you tell me what you feel the state of the employer brand profession, if you like, or the discipline? Where's it at right now? Where's the good, bad, and ugly with employer brands right now, where we sit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are at, in terms of the evolution of employer brand, we're at peak employer brand to date, but we haven't hit a ceiling yet. I think we're still progressing and we're still evolving. It's become now, I think it's matured to the point where it's a focal point and a foundational component of most talent acquisition teams. I think we're far past the days of like, should we be doing this? Does this matter? And more of like, are we resourcing this enough? Are we using the right channels? Are we segmenting our messaging to reach the right audiences that's going to convert and compel? So I think in that sense, we're getting much more sophisticated with how we look at employer branding and how we approach employer branding. And whether you look at the alignment between kind of recruitment and marketing, or kind of taking more and more pages out of marketing's playbook and infusing them into how we recruit, we're seeing a lot more of that. And I think to the theme of this podcast, the nature of the employer brand evolution, we're in the earlier days of employer brand, it was all about talent attraction, like at all costs. Look at our ping pong table, look at our culture. We've got free lunch, like, yay, right? So you're selling the sizzle, and everybody did that, and it worked in the early days. But the problem is that created a logjam in your recruiting funnel. So now you had all these people that were getting really excited because all they knew about was the sizzle. If they had a more broader view of what it's really like to work there, kind of warts and all, work style, culture, all those things, some of them would have opted out. And that's a good thing. And I think talent attraction nowadays is about focusing on, and kind of where employer brand is, it's focusing on presenting a real and true view of what it's like to work at your company. So ultimately candidates can make more informed decisions about whether they align or not, and opt in or out based on that. So I'm excited to see that, because repelling is almost as an important part of attracting with employer brand in its current kind of machination. So
yeah, agreed.
That's a tweetable quote right there.
and further thoughts.
If I was live tweeting, I would totally tweet it out.
That's probably because you're somebody who can live tweet. I've never been able to do that thing, where you tweet live at a conference.
It's great for audio. It's not so good for video, and you're kind of like, I'm talking to you, I'm looking over here, I'm typing something.
Yeah, exactly. Just everybody's looking like that. Look like they're not concentrating on the talk. But
even the hosts are checking out. This is terrible.
I know. But I always find that I'm a guy, so I can only do one thing at a time. And that's just listen. Well, there are two things. I'm listening and looking. That's my lot, basically. So to try and tweet and listen and look at the same time, no. Stacey, any other further thoughts on where you feel the current state of EB is, and beyond what Lars has spoken already?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that we're seeing a lot of people who have marketing backgrounds entering employer branding teams rather than training up recruiters to do employer branding and recruitment marketing. So for me, that's really exciting. I have to say, probably the best EB person I personally have ever worked with came straight out of marketing with no recruiting background whatsoever. And the creativity and the subject matter expertise that she brought to the team was incredible. And what she's been able to accomplish leading that group is phenomenal. I guess it's not a secret. I'll give her a shout out. But it's the team over at booking.com, Andrea over there. So anyway, take a peek at what they're doing. But I think it's really great that we have marketing leading EB. We have marketing people coming into EB teams. We have, EB dotted line and with recruiting and marketing. So I think that there's a lot of kind of commingling that has not historically been the case. Yeah. And it's really helped us elevate our game. And it's why I think, to Lars's point, that we're seeing so much great work come out of employer branding campaigns now that we didn't a few years ago, because of this real marketing kind of boost that we're seeing in the teams. So I think that that it was going to happen eventually, and I'm glad to see that it's definitely that time has arrived. So I think that's the big standout for me right now is that point right there. So
but importantly, do you feel like it's one of those things that should absolutely be staying inside the recruitment function now? I mean, employer branding, should it be disappearing towards the marketing function, or does it have to be controlled by the recruitment function?
I don't think that there's I think it depends on the organization, the team, the resources, the players involved, what the mission is. Is it a consumer brand? Is it a B2B? Is it a startup? Every company has their own specific business challenges, recruiting needs, branding goals. Some already have a strong consumer brand to fall back on. Many don't. So I wouldn't say that it's definitely a one or the other, but I think for sure you need to have some marketing kind of boost in your team in some capacity, whether you report up or hire those folks in, or dotted line, or have regular communication, or leverage their tools and resources and creative, whatever it is. So
and I think, just to add to that, I mean, I don't think there's ever been a successful and compelling employer brand that didn't have a connection to the marketing department. Like at least a relationship, at least a partnership on some level, I think is an essential ingredient to employer brand, because otherwise you have the keeper of the consumer brand, right? Who's traditionally has been the gatekeeper of how the organization is being positioned externally. And then you have this kind of upstart function, which is recruiting an employer brand. And if they're not in sync, and most importantly, if consumer brand doesn't trust what recruiting is doing with employer brand, they're going to roadblock the hell out of what they're trying to do. And so I think investing in that relationship, and then to Stacey's point, bringing those skill sets and that kind of thinking, that marketeer thinking into recruiting, and infusing that with the recruiting sensibilities of understanding your target audience and talent attraction and conversion and building a brand within a community where you're trying to recruit. I think that partnership is really powerful, but it's also really important.
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense. And I remember doing a talk a couple of years ago to Norway or somewhere, and about the other component being of this, where you went to, Lars, a few minutes ago, with the creative side. I mean, beyond marketing, but into the creative team, because I think we all consider that the most engaging, interesting employer brand content has been well produced by, not perfectly produced, but that well-produced thing where a creative eye looks at it and thinks, right, how do human beings attract each other, and how do they talk to each other? And I think that, and looking at where things like video skills, like art direction skills, all those sort of things create another layer, don't they, that we tend to forget. I always think it's that recruitment and marketing, but there's also the creative people that can add a whole layer to this. And I always find as well, because I mean, you guys have worked with some quite large companies, and I work with quite small SMEs, where often my conversation with employer brand is with the CEO, is with the person who started the company 10, 15 years ago or whatever. And it's really interesting that that because there's no recruitment department in those smaller, and there's no marketing, well, it might be a marketing department, but certainly not a recruitment department as such. There certainly is never going to be an employer brand department in these companies. And so it's interesting how we always kind of looked at using different layers across the business as part of the journey effectively, because it was kind of like the only way really to get a very authentic message across the businesses, by trying to understand what does the tech team think employer brand is, or what's fascinating about working for this organization. So I guess to a degree, there's lots of layers that should be involved in these projects. Really, it's just I guess in a larger companies, it must be harder to bring those people together, right? I mean, it's but in a smaller company, I can get them all in a room and and get them all talking to each other. It's slightly different, I guess. But so let's look at where do we find people who are trying to get the best from their employer brand. And I think it's a hard conversation to start with, because I think there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of advice. There's a lot of theory that's out there. Where do we get some good resource for this kind of knowledge? Where's the best case studies out there? Lars, you referred to HROS earlier. Probably that seems like a good angle to look at here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm as a co-founder, I'm biased towards HR open source, and that's certainly not the exclusive place. I think the cool thing about recruiting right now, and really, we're especially working in a field like employer brand, where we're kind of together, this community of people that's working employer brand. We're writing the playbook as we're going. There isn't a set playbook. It's not like marketing where you've got decades of established practice that you could look back on and say, okay, in this situation, this kind of thing tends to work. Here's the lever you pull if you want to do this. We're still writing that. We're still figuring that out. And so the cool thing about, to me, initiatives like HR open source is it's a community of practitioners that are brought together by the idea of saying, if we build something cool, let's give it away. Let's tell people how we did that. And for me, when I was kind of coming up in employer branding, that was a big part of how I learned, right? There wasn't books, there wasn't courses I could take. I had to see what somebody was doing over here and call them and be like, how'd you do that? That was really cool. Like, I'd like to do that at my company, or a version of that. And so that was a really manual and tedious process, and you had to have the network in place to be able to do that. So that's a barrier. And now you see initiatives like, HR open source. I mean, I think of our almost 30 case studies, about a third of them are an employer brand from companies like Dell and Hootsuite and Virgin Media and, Cisco, and they're sharing exactly how they design and execute specific initiatives. So there's a lot of inspiration to be taken there. The Employer Branding Forum is a community on Facebook that I know Stacey and I are both a part of, and that has hundreds of employer brand practitioners that come together and they ask questions and they share ideas. So it's almost like this kind of weird tribe within recruiting of like folks that are doing this work, because they're not all recruiters. Some are from marketing, some are from other disciplines. But everybody as a whole, I think, is really generous about sharing what they do and how they do it, and like highlighting great work. So if I see something that somebody else did, I'm going to share the hell out of it, because I want other people to see it. And then I'm going to try to recruit them to do a case study so they can tell people exactly how they did it. But it's this idea that there's so much inspiration that's out there to be found, whether it's a case study or whether it's just kind of browsing great work. And I know, Stacey, when she did a lot of really good work at Zappos a couple of years ago, she was great about going and talking about how they did it. And not to say that somebody's going to take that and say, okay, now I'm going to be Zappos, because you're not. Right? You have different culture, you have different resources, but the fact that people that are doing the work are willing to share it and willing to give people an insight into how it's done, that then makes it less of a barrier for other people that want to innovate and they want to kind of pursue a similar path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Stacey, and great case studies. What are your favorite EB stories out there? I mean, you can pick your own if you like. I mean, one of the things, you've done some cool stuff. I mean,
no, I don't want to pick my own. There's a lot of good stuff.
I'll ask you about that in a minute.
I'll defer to Lars on some of his favorites. No, I think the best examples of EB work. Sorry, we've got dogs and phones and like
it's all going on, isn't it?
The ADD in me is like something shiny. Anyway, it's just funny to me. Anyway, but I think the best case studies have a little blend of sort of creative, something that you haven't necessarily seen a million other times. It has a little bit of a, that transparency, authenticity words, those buzzwords that are often played out, but there really is some realness to it. So it may not be super produced video that's super slick, that has a big budget. It has a realness to it, a rawness to it. Even if it's, iPhone video, what have you. It has a little bit of a component of realness to it. And then it also has sort of the employee's perspective, I think, where they're telling their story, the work they're doing, why did they work there? Why are they choosing to stay there? What gets them out of bed in the morning? You know, what about the values really speaks to them? Whatever it is, giving those personal kind of insights and letting people see a little bit about kind of the work that's being done. Again, it's not just about the foosballs and the free lunches and those sorts of things. And if it is, then you're attracting the people that are less interested in the work being done and more interested in having fun at work all day. And really, that's not necessarily the people we want to attract. We want to attract the people that care about the work we're doing, that speaks to them, that's challenging and interesting to them, something that they want to be a part of. And really, at the end of the day, that's who we want. So the best, you know, I'll defer to Lars on his favorite case studies. He's got more kind of depth in that area. But I think that the best ones that I've seen, kind of thinking back through, have kind of incorporated some version of that. It's not just one or the other. So yeah, you know, swirl up your creative juices and see what you come up with, and keep it real and get your employees talking. And hopefully their perspectives will attract others that kind of share those same values, that same work ethic, that same mission, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to what's saying, I mean, go back 3 years, right? Especially if you're looking at Silicon Valley tech companies, every career site had a ping pong table. Every career site had but honestly, like we laugh, but that was like, it was a joke. At one point, I was looking through career sites, and it was like, this is, I mean, people thought like, oh, this is what people want. Like, no, nobody gives a shit about your ping pong table. Like, that's not why they're going to join your company. And if it is,
it's almost like, it's like, where's Waldo? Oh, there it is. I can go to the next career page. Oh,
yeah, like, oh, wait a minute, that company didn't have a ping pong. I'm not applying there. Oh my God, what am I going to do with my like 5 minutes of free time I have every day? So, I think it just again illustrates the maturity of employer brand, kind of going through like, look at everything that's so cool to like, look at everything that's so real. And you're like, yeah, these things are cool, but you know what? It's an open environment. You're going to have no privacy here. Are you cool with that? Like, are you okay with that environment? Because if you're not, like, don't even apply. And that I think is what we're seeing more of now. And it's ultimately making our funnels better and richer because we've got more qualified folks that are opting in based on reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think there's a professional component to the employer brand message as well. I think the finding the people who believe in the same kind of work you do. I mean, there's all the soft stuff like the purpose and mission. That's always got to be there, and you've got to be the way of life working there and all that kind of stuff. But we certainly in certain technical fields, there needs to be that kind of I admire the work that you do as an organization kind of point to this. And I always think that's a really important point within your employer brand as well, that these people kind of want to work on the gigs that you work on. I mean, that's, you know, because like, it's like Stacey just said, it's not just all about, you know, you don't want people who just want to come and play football and stare out the window at the view over the river or whatever. It's the things about, are they going to get into the project that they're doing and go, sheesh, this is good. This is serious. I'm so proud to be doing this quality of work, this nature of work for these people, for whatever it is that they're doing. And I always find that's kind of an interesting area to bring into this kind of mix as well. There's a couple of questions.
Can I just randomly throw something out there? I don't know, this has hit me, but it's amazing me. Just I'm back in the recruiting seat and I'm talking to people all day. I'm sourcing and I'm having to, you know, screen them and submit them to clients and hope the client likes them and hope that they get hired and hope they stick around, and all these components are coming together. So I'm actually, you know, true recruiting now, but it's amazing to me how much of my employer brand hat is being part of that process as I'm recruiting, because I need to understand what I have and market it or get it out to the right audience and know what their motivations are and be able to attract the right people. And when I'm selling the role to them, I'm being very careful to not oversell it. I'm trying to really be real about, hey, this company does not let people work from home pretty much ever. Is that going to be okay? And so I'm really having to keep it real because I don't want them to have a bait and switch and fall out later in the process, which is embarrassing, or heaven forbid start and then find this out. So it's really interesting. So it's all about understanding motivations, attracting the right people, communicating, you know, getting the people right people in, making sure you're talking to them about what's good, but also what's bad, but still getting them excited about the role. And with the long-term goal of longevity and engaged employee and retention and all these, it's everything that we're trying to do in employer branding, you know, is sourcing and employer branding are really, you know, we've said it many times, they're kind of the two sides of the same coin, but I don't know. I think in my past life, when I was on the inside as a corporate recruiter, I don't think I focused as much on the keep it real side. And now it really matters more than ever. And so I don't know if it's the EB training in me or just the fact that I'm kind of, on the dark side, agency side for the first time. But it's really interesting, all the parallels between what we're talking about and what we do as sourcers every day. And if you do sugarcoat too much or sell too hard, it's only going to come back and bite you. So the keeping it real part is really imperative, I think.
And it means you take the brief differently as well, doesn't it? I mean, you take the brief on different layers of importance rather than just looking at pure skills tasks alone. I always find now I ask way more different questions than I used to ask, just by the fact I'm now starting to understand why would an employee or a person, a professional, want to come and join this company. What are the things they're going to tell me is the reason why they would want to join that company? Because certainly in early agency days, and do you know what, as an interesting thing here, I'm going to refer to it because I think it naturally follows on from this as well, as to what kind of information we should be passing to candidates. Sure, but how should we be attracting candidates in the process? Now, the discussion on the right hand side here was, well, the question from Jim was, should recruitment teams be recruiting recruiters from the marketing side of the house now rather than maybe recruitment side, which is something close to my heart because I built a recruitment agency full of marketers rather than recruitment people.
I think he's asking about the political side of the house. Like, do we need politics people? That's what he's saying, data and campaigns.
Oh, that might be a bit further down.
Voting.
That might be a bit further down.
Sorry.
A lot of questions there.
I was like, that's interesting. I don't know. Sorry.
Because it sort of went from Jim sort of asking that, and then Audra quite rightly said, marketers may be good at will marketers be good at closing candidates, which Jim says that's an interesting point. But then we started talking about the political side of that.
Sorry. I was like, interesting. I was like, I don't know. I've never thought of that. Sorry.
But, I mean, should the I mean, you just mentioned it, Stacey, that the best sourcer or the best employer brand person you brought in had no recruitment experience.
Nope.
I had great recruiters who had no recruitment experience, but maybe had marketing experience. And the question about closing, surely if the attraction process and the self deselection process has been set up well, then actually it's
much easier to close. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. That's exactly where I was kind of going with this. It's that actually the closing factor is not so much of an issue anymore because they're already bought in, right? I mean, they've already taken the bait and they're excited to be part of the process. And that's a big part of this, isn't it? I mean, how can companies go about the kind of the self deselection kind of process through what offerings are out there today to help candidates step off the candidate journey? Lars, I mean, you're pretty sound at this kind of area. What's available now for companies to use to make this process better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less about technology, more about humanity, more about approach. So it's about being very kind of open in your employer brand efforts around like the environment, the pros, the cons. I mean, we've kind of beaten that to death a little bit, but the idea is presenting a really honest and authentic view, and then making sure that your recruiters are backing that up. Your hiring managers are backing that up, right? And like that, all recruiters and all hiring managers are different. They may come from organizations that are like, you close at all costs. I close at all costs. Like, I don't want recruiters that want to close at all costs. I don't want them to close the wrong candidate in a job because it's going to close a rec, right? That's damaging and that's toxic and it's not good for the candidate. It's not good for the company and it's not good for the recruiter. To me, that's lazy. I want a recruiter that's going to challenge candidates. I want a recruiter that's going to really, again, we talk about like a strong employer brand can help pre-close candidates on the front end. It can, but it's also the role of the recruiter to pre-close that candidate every step of the way. And you do that by having open and honest conversations. Like, what is it you're really looking for? Well, what is your ideal next step? What are you driven by? Okay, well, you said X is the most important factor in your job search. We don't have X here. We have Y and Z, but we don't have X. So is that really the most important part? Because if it is, totally get that, and that should be, but you're not going to find that here. So maybe this isn't the right place. Like, I almost think that we, and it's hard because I've run big global recruiting teams. Like, being a recruiter is hard. You've got tons of pressures on you, and I understand that. But when you're in a position where, your default is, how do I close the rec? Right. And you think you get this closer badge as a recruiter, like, I'm a badass, I close all my people. Like, I don't want somebody who's going to close everybody if they're not the right fit for the job. I want a recruiter that has the emotional intelligence that can understand an individual, understand their drivers, understand whether what we're offering as a role actually fits for them as much as their abilities fit for us. It's got to be a mutual fit, and I want a recruiter that can assess that. And if they determine that it's not, I actually want them to steer that candidate away.
Yeah.
Right. And like it's a different, it's maybe a bit of a different approach, but I think it's the approach that makes sense for all parties. And when you approach things that way, you're going to have stickier hires that are actually going to be around for the long haul, because they're not just looking for a job and they're not, sold whatever it's going to take to get them to say yes. They're actually pushed back. And I think when you're from a candidate experience standpoint, if a recruiter is being really real with me and they're saying, hey, look, I want to take the time to get to know you and get to know what your drivers are, and I'm actually going to tell you up front, like, how they don't align with this job, I'm going to really want that job. Like, if that isn't a blocker for me, and if it is, I'm going to walk. And both of those outcomes are good.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm going to piggyback on what Lars said. I think great recruiters early on in the conversation ask the candidate what their motivators are, what are their drivers, what's important to them. And then you kind of are aligning all the way. And if it's not, I just had somebody on Friday I loved him, but my opportunity did not scratch his itch, if you will, did not tick all his boxes. And I told him, you know what? I said, I think you need to think about this over the weekend. And sure enough, he emailed me. He's like, but here's what I do want, Stacey. If you see anything, I'm happy to let him go, because ultimately this was a dead end path anyway. Even if he's a fabulous person, I'm not going to force this issue. But the same thing with, good marketers. We as marketers and employment branders need to understand what motivates our audience, the people we're looking to attract. And how do we know that? Maybe we do that through research, and we go out there and we're asking or surveying or what have you. Maybe we're asking the people that are in the role now that have similar backgrounds or similar skill sets. Hey, what motivates you in this role? Why did you choose us? Why do you choose to stay? What gets you excited? And then we kind of lead with that to similar folks with techies, for instance. We talk about the things that make our techies happier. So if we can understand what motivates our audience and what will ultimately help them stick around. So that kind of directly parallels. I know there's a whole debate right now, recruiters aren't marketers and marketers aren't recruiters, but in many ways, of course, there's going to be some overlap and some parallel happening there. And so I think at the end of the day, if we don't know who we're attracting and what motivates them, then we're just kind of blasting up a bunch of content up there and hoping something sticks. And we've got to be more data driven and kind of understand who our audience is and what they want if we're going to be effective, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the real answer to the question is actually, the way we've just talked about the way that we would hire for our organizations, for our hiring managers, and the great questions we'd ask on the way in are the same questions we should be asking of our recruiters, so that we do get the skill set that is the open, honest conversation type people, whether we call them closers or not. I've always hated the phrase closing, so I kind of, it always makes the bumps go on the back of my neck, but I hate that phrase. But I think the asking correct conversations but having the skills of a marketer is a brilliant kind of combination. Now that's hard to find, but who says recruitment is easy, right? I mean, I think the answer to me is it's both, isn't it? You need the people who can have the right conversations but understand the recruitment effort. And hopefully what you guys have been discussing there answers Jim's question around, do you think overall that recruiters really get the importance of employer brand when they're engaging candidates? And actually that is what you were sort of referring to there, that probably, that they need to, don't they? They need to respect the company brand, employer brand in those questions that are being asked. Otherwise, you're going to get the wrong people through the door. There was another question. Directed at you, Stacey, by Jim. Jim's I should hand the mic over to Jim really at the moment. Or the questions he's got on the right hand side here. Jim's asked, what do you say to companies who are still paranoid about employees tweeting about their employer? That's to you, Stacey. It's a little bit of a slight segue, but I guess it's important. I think this is important in this process.
No, I think Jim probably knows what I'm going to say here, probably. But thank you, Jim. This is probably a softball on Jim's part to save me here. But no, I think employees are talking about your company anyway, and if you try to control that or smother that in some way, all you're going to do is get the people who are disgruntled still being vocal. I think we should go the opposite direction and encourage all of our employees to talk about what it's like to work here and get all the people. Glassdoor talks a little bit about the people that are providing feedback on Glassdoor, and you've got the cheerleaders on one end and you've got the the disgruntled naysayer former employees on the other end, but that whole middle of the graph there is not really activated. So the same concept applies not just to Glassdoor, not just to Twitter, but in general. If we can get all of our employees saying, this is why I work here, this is what I like, this is what it's really like, you know, and yes, there's going to be some negative mixed in there, but guess what? That's all right. It's going to be the totality of what's being said is going to be taken as a whole, and it's not just going to be a few disgruntled employees, because all the people that are the rule followers know that they're not allowed to say anything. I think that kind of policy can backfire real quick if you tell people don't tweet about the company.
Yeah, precisely. And I've got on this show next week, we've got Carmel Collins from Cisco talking about their employee generated content stuff, which should be really interesting as well, because I think that's a fascinating area about how honest you allow your people to be and how free you allow them to be as well. I mean, I think there's not many case studies out of it at the moment, because I've been trying to find a guest to go on with Carmel, and because there's Lloyds Bank over here, Lloyds Bank Digital have got a website that is all employee experiences, sometimes good, sometimes bad, the tough stuff, and they upload their own content, and it's really, really fascinating. It's a real story look inside Lloyds Bank as an organization and what it's like to work there, the wins and the losses and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's I think that all that kind of stuff's exciting, for sure. So give yourself a chance to have a little bit of a boast, because you deflected this earlier, Stacey. But like, I'm not going to allow you to deflect it. But what are your proudest moments? I mean, talk about, you know, you guys have done some really cool stuff in employer brand, and I guess what would you say the proudest moments each of them are, and why were they the proudest moments? What's the effect that makes you kind of go? Because there's always that moment, isn't there, when you look back at something you've just done and kind of go, geez, that was good. I'm really, it makes you go, your heart go a little bit that you created something that did X, Y, Z. Do you want to answer that, Stacey? Is there something that?
Wow. Gosh,
Sorry.
I'm trying to think. One? I don't know. I hate talking. I hate like anything that's braggadocious. I don't know. I would have to say probably the coolest project that I worked on was my most recent client. It was a small 100-person startup called Honeybook that no one's heard of. Yeah. Hopefully that's changing. When we started, they had no presence whatsoever from a employer branding perspective. They had zero reviews on Glassdoor, but it really is a special place, a special culture. So many, like, I don't know, the word magical isn't right, but it was like, you know, you walked in and I saw little sparklies. Like, I really loved that culture, as did the employees and the leadership and the stuff they were doing. And I don't know, there was a lot of good stuff happening there, but there was no spotlight on it whatsoever. So we did several campaigns that I thought worked out really great. We did this picture yourself at Honeybook thing, and we did a really cool campaign there. But by the end of the day, when it was all said and done, they were, and not through any false, you know, manipulation whatsoever, we just encouraged people to go out and talk on Glassdoor, say what you want to say. But they are #1 on all of Glassdoor out of all the companies in the whole United States, out of like 300,000 companies or something. They're #1 rated. Granted, they're a small company. It's a lot easier to achieve that than if you're a large company. But the work that they put out, the content they pushed out, they definitely kept it real. They showed some of their warts for sure. They talked about, you know, having limited resources. They were really, it turned out, I don't know, I'm really proud of how it turned out. Just some of the work that we did there, and just some of the fact that the word is out now about them a little bit, and they're able to attract people that they definitely could not before. And that was only a 4-month project or so, but we did really great stuff. I'm really proud of the work that we did there.
Brilliant.
I don't know.
I know there's something. I mean,
not to disparage the Zappos of this world, but I feel like everyone expects that answer all the time. So I
know what you mean.
This was an evolution, and from what I did. I of course will always be proud of the work we did at Zappos.
And that little heart impact you have on the SMEs, it's kind of exciting, isn't it? Because when they all buy into something that they've never seen before, and they kind of go, "This is cool. This is amazing. What we're doing here." I think a lot of people already. Recruitment's fun.
Yeah, I mean, from an employer brand perspective, a lot of people already know about Zappos and their culture and their, you know, through all that. This is a little like hidden gem that we actually were able to shine a spotlight on, and they're getting recognition and awards and things. And before, they were virtually unknown. So to me, that feels pretty cool. So anyway,
I buy that totally, Stacey. And Lars, Jim said he reckons your Hootsuite story is the best one. I mean, but what about for you? What's the thing that's has been the proudest?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I was I thought you might ask that, and I was actually thinking about that. There's a particular case study we did at Hootsuite, or a particular project that I think Jim's referring to around how we built our global employer brand playbook. And to me, I mean, it was exciting because I was a big Hootsuite fan before they were a client. So getting a chance to get inside of a culture you kind of admired from afar, and then seeing it's actually more interesting and kind of more compelling and cooler than you even thought it was great. So being able to kind of, one of the, they had gone through explosive growth and the employer brand, they were operating in 9 countries, and it was really hard to scale that employer brand and tell that story with intent on a consistent basis. And so we created, I think, one of the first global employer brand playbooks for a company. And so I was proud of that end product, but I was really proud of the fact that we then had them, it took no effort. Like they greenlit everything we did around HR open source, but that was when we were first piloting HR open source. And that became one of our first big offerings from a case study standpoint, is we actually wrote a case study around not just how we built that global employer brand playbook, but then we gave the playbook away. And it was embedded. You can download it and you can copy it. And I've talked to a couple handfuls of peers in this space that actually let me know they've used that as a foundation to build their own employer brand playbook. And so to me, it combined a lot of things I'm passionate about, but the fact that it was a catalyst that other people were able to use and use that as basis for their own work, like that was something that I still get excited about. So
yeah, no, I remember looking at it as well. It's super good piece of work. So, well, look, just a couple of things on the right hand side here. I don't know whether there's any questions in this. There's a little bit of chatter, so I just want to make sure I don't miss any questions that people have wanted to. Retention is the ultimate measure of a good recruiter. True or false? That's a very quick question from Jim.
False.
I'd say false.
Okay. Any reasons why?
If you're retaining crap hires, that's not good for anybody.
Yeah. Okay.
I think quality of hire is an important metric across a TA org in general.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, I get that. I always think the recruiter, it's very difficult for the recruiter to be responsible for retention. You can only be responsible for making quality hires, but you can't really ever be responsible for retention. There's a lot of things that help along the way, but it's okay. So let's for the last few minutes of this, let's look forward. Let's and when I say look forward, there is a little bit of it now, but what's cool now? What's exciting about where employer brand is going in relation to the future? I mean, what's fun out there? I mean, Lars, I just, last Thursday at Wreckfest, just watched you mesmerize everybody with some cool stuff out there in the world at the moment that it's changing potentially how we can do all this kind of stuff. For those who didn't see that, where's this all going? What's exciting?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to get excited about. Jim mentioned Unilever's Radical Experiment, where they're doing kind of assessments and games and not doing application. And they're using AI and kind of machine learning to match people's kind of profile based on their skills, their EQ, all those kind of things with jobs. I think that's fascinating. I think augmented reality and soon to be virtual reality is also incredibly exciting. The fact that we come from a very recent history of like getting hung up on fonts and color palettes and things like that. And in a couple of years, we're going to be designing virtual rooms for meetings and augmented reality experiences for candidates. Like, that's crazy. And it's not that far off. And I think even looking at, there's a great case study by Chris Ray at Anchor Trust at Wreckfest, talking about how they created a bot to allow people to they're kind of in the healthcare space, the home care space, I should say. And they created a bot to create an automated engine that would allow people, because people work different hours, they work night shifts, they work day shifts, to interact with the recruiting apparatus and tell them exactly what they wanted to do, where they wanted to do it. It scheduled interviews. It did all of that. I'm like, that's all. Like, I think to me, like, that reinforced, I think people talk about technology and they get scared and they say, okay, is it going to eliminate the need for recruiters? That's BS. It's not. What it's going to do is it's going to allow us to leverage tools to do some of the more kind of manual tasks that we do today, scheduling, et cetera, and focus more on the humanity, focus more on getting to know the people we're recruiting, getting to build personas around what's going to really attract to them. And really, I think, help us get back to our roots more than it's going to eliminate our jobs. So that to me that's all stuff that I'm excited about. And the most exciting part is ask me that question in a year and it's going to be something completely different because the pace of innovation is just accelerating. So yeah, if you geek out on technology, this is a good time, as I know Stacey and I both do. So
yeah, we'll reconvene in a year, shall we, and ask the question again. And to echo the point on the anchor trust thing, I mean, I think one of those things that people worry about with chatbots is, do you take the human element out of the process because you're automating part of the process? And there was nothing robotic, did it, about that anchor trust case study. It was the most human feeling conversation as it went through. It had GIFs, it had great multiple choice questions. It was a brilliant example of how chatbots can work for recruitment, which hadn't been too many great examples before of. So that was really good to see for those who want to try and check that out. Stacey, for yourself, what's exciting you out there at the Mount that I think you can?
I don't know. My answer is not nearly as exciting as Lars's chatbots and AI and VR and augmented reality. But I'm just personally excited to see differentiation as a real focus right now in the EB space. For a while, there was a lot of, seeing the same types of content, the same things. It was kind of hard to tell one company from another. We were definitely more in sell mode and pure marketing mode. And now it is more real. It is more, there is more of the personality and the flavor of the company and the employees and the work they're doing coming through. So really, I'm hoping now we're at a point in our industry, or in our space rather, where candidates or potential candidates can look at the body of work of one company versus another from a content perspective and say, wow, I really understand the difference between these two companies, and this one aligns much more to my interests and my values and what have you than this one. For a while, it was like, everything sounds great. I don't know where to go. They all sound good. I'll take them all. I'm going to apply to 20 different companies. And now they can be like, okay, yes, no, maybe I need to learn more. And I think we're finally at a point where people are able to make educated decisions when they're kind of navigating this process. And for me, that's exciting and what the ultimate goal of EB is all about.
No, I totally agree. I would say probably here in the UK, whether it's a comparison to the US or not, I don't know. I still think there's a lot of work to be done in necessarily to get to that thing you just talked about. I think it's still I think the other thing as well that, and I don't know whether you guys got any advice on this, particularly with what you've just referred to, Stacey, with your Honeybook example. I think the fear a lot of the time is a lot of this costs a heck of a lot of money. I mean, Unilever, it's great, all that stuff down there that Jim just shared, but it costs a heck of a lot of money to make that kind of stuff happen. Not every company's got that kind of budget. What are the kind of, are there some, for those who are maybe kind of going to watch this and maybe not kind of go, oh, I can't be Unilever, I can't be Jaguar and put a augmented reality thing on the Gorillas app. I can't do that kind of stuff because I work for a 250-man company in Scotland doing engineering, and we don't have that kind of budget. What are the quick wins? What do you think are the kind of tips you would offer to a company to say, this is how to get there a little quicker without a big budget? Any kind of ideas? Because I want to exclude that kind of story as well.
Yeah, I can jump in real quick just because I've been in startup world the last year or so. I thought it would be a fun challenge. But I think that, blogging is free. Getting your employees talking is free. Taking photos on your iPhone is free. Even raw video. We did employee takeovers on Snapchat, where the employee would go through and just snap their day. This is life in sales at Honeybook for the day, and then the next day. And they would encourage their friends, like, hey, I'm going to be on this channel today. And then everyone follows. As time went on, more and more people were following because we had that personal connection. So we were doing, we were calling backdoor branding, basically, or backyard branding rather, where we were basically creating content, and rather than just pushing it out on our company channel, which may or may not have much following, we were taking the person being spotlighted and having them share it out to so everyone that they used to work with, or everyone they went to school with, or their neighbors who live in town or have similar backgrounds would know about. So we were driving awareness through our employees themselves, and they're being spotlighted would bring people back. So social media is free. A lot of media can be free. Blogging content, we were using Google Drive and an Excel spreadsheet, and build out a calendar where people would sign up and they'd write one blog post a year throughout the company, and everybody was talking. Or if they weren't comfortable writing a blog, we would do a Q&A series with them and take their picture and creatively brand it up. But so much of this, the only real budget that we had was they paid for me, a consultant, for a few months, and they had one recruiter who's 50% of her time was dedicated to employer branding. But really, you don't have to have big budgets. And sometimes raw video is more impactful than this really fancy. I mean, I love, I won't even say the name because I don't want to be disparaging, but there's really great branding videos out there. But at the end of the day, they may not be as impactful as the actual person telling their story to someone who's listening and it resonates with them. So yeah, I'm glad I caught myself there. Anyway, I really am a big fan, I swear.
I'm the same as you, because I'm also gone down the smaller company route these last couple of years.
So it doesn't all have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive.
I mean, we wrote Ron blog, and because I picked the right person to write the blog last year, it was one of the co-founders of the company, and I found out he had a bit of a fan base. I got him to write a blog about the comparison between the old days of the madman admin days to the modern day of digital planners and all that kind of stuff, because that's their world. And we got 4 hires from that blog, in a 45-man company. So you kind of that it's because people bought into the people, and that's the bit that cost zero. I mean, I'm sure his time is expensive, but other than that, it's for his business. And yeah, I agree. It was the very, very real stuff is, and I'm doing the same right now. It's, the first thing I did is sat and interviewed the CEO of the company and kind of go to the heart of why they do what they do. But there's some really cool things you've just said there as well that I'm going to borrow.
Even if you can't afford a consultant, that's why, and I'll pass this to Lars, but places like HROS or this employment branding forum on Facebook or the LinkedIn talent blog, they're always featuring what companies are doing in this space, and you can take that and kind of read through it and get inspired. And I'm stealing Lars's line now, so I'll shut up and let him finish this thought. But for sure, there's so many free resources to draw inspiration from, and maybe you'll figure it out as you go, and that's okay. I mean, we've all been figuring it out as we go. So if you make mistakes, that's all right. That's real, and people appreciate that. I think it's fine. I really don't think everything has to be perfect and flawless all the time by any stretch. And you can tell that from me just even in this call today.
and a direct question to that, Stacey, here on the right-hand side, but I think this might be a little bit of a large company versus small company kind of conversation, really. But the raw videos you mentioned, how do the company's risk and compliance work with it? Was there any pushback, approval processes yet, etc.?
Yeah, we just partnered closely with marketing, and again, in the smaller companies, it was less of an issue. But in the larger companies, we worked closely with marketing, and they kind of knew what the protocols were there. And yeah, for sure, at larger companies or in any regulated industry, there may be different rules, and you have to be kind of careful about it. But I would say, your mileage may vary. Each company has their own needs, but in many cases, you can do a lot with raw video, and maybe you don't. Maybe you have an approval process before you post that stuff, but there's still lots you can do. So I would say, check with your team and see what's possible. But I'm talking too much now. I'll let Lars drive. Lars,
I'm just very quick. Yeah, go Lars.
No, I was just say I would echo everything that Stacey just said. I think rule number 1 of employer brand is know your company, right? So you can look at all the work Stacey does. You can look at all the work that I do. You can look at all the work that anybody else does, or what they tell you are proven practices in employer branding. If you're not taking that back, like consume all the content, consume all the inspiration you can, but you have to localize that to your organization. And so, to Michelle's point, if you're in a very compliance-driven organization, video could actually open you up to legal risk depending on what it is. So you have to understand the environment you're in and build for that environment. But you absolutely don't need a massive budget to make a big impact. There's lots of, if you've got a strong MacGyver gene, you can hack your way to a lot of success. And I think a lot of the people that are now kind of, doing stuff at the leading edge of employer brand came from that environment, because in the old days, nobody had a budget. Right. So the people that have been doing this for 7 or more years, in the early stage, we had nothing. So everything we built was from the ground up. Everything we built was hacking our way to success. And now we've earned the right to have a budget in many cases, but it wasn't always the case. And so, scrappiness is probably one of the best traits, I think, in employer branding, because you're never going to have all the tools and resources, but if you can figure it out and still be dangerous, I want to see what you do.
Yeah.
It's a true test of one's creativity when you have no budgets and no resources and limited options.
It costs nothing to tell a story. That's the way of looking at it, isn't it? And I think that's what we're always looking for. These are really great stories, isn't it? The best bit of authentic message. He never meant it to be an employer branding exercise. It was the CEO of a recruitment company called Goodman Masson here in the UK. And when he changed the philosophy of his company about 3-4 years ago, decided to change the way he employed and rewarded his people. And he big kind of culture shift in the company. And then one morning he was walking his dog on Tooting Common in South London, and he got his iPhone out, and just randomly 7 o'clock in the morning was took a video of himself just chatting. He's thinking, he's not pre-planned. He's just thinking about what it is he's trying to say, etc., etc. And he just 7 minutes long. It was quite a long video, but it's a brilliant watch, because all of a sudden you really got to the heart of why he was doing what he was doing, and why it would be a great place to work. And I kind of thought I'd want to work for that company as well. I love the heart and everything behind it. It was fantastic. Yeah. So I don't know what time. I know everybody else has got the same, but I've just now got 2 little images of you two rather than the 2 camera things. But okay, look, any last word from anybody on employer branding before we go? Or have we covered it?
I'll let Stacey go first. Ladies first.
Oh, any finishing thoughts? Oh, I thought he was asking the audience. Not us.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question. Where are you asking us in the audience?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. I'd say try to. I guess my one piece of advice is, for years we were trying to get recruiters to own employer branding and kind of do it, and kind of hoping they would, and trying to force it or beg them or whatever. I think what I've learned is, and now we're at a point in the evolution of the industry where, of where we are in the space, that we can now make the case for a dedicated resource, or at least a partially dedicated resource. So I would say having somebody on the team whose sole job is that, or is part of their job, and they can still try to rally the troops and get employees engaged, I think that's still huge. But to expect that they're just going to get up and do it without somebody kind of being dedicated, again, I'm thinking more with a small company hat. Large companies, of course, already have a team. But if you haven't dedicated someone to own this, then I think that it will fall flat as soon as the effort to launch it, is complete. So I would say, yeah, definitely try to have some dedicated resources to own it and be data driven and measure and iterate and see what's working and do targeted campaigns. Really own the EB process at that company.
Brilliant.
So
brilliant. And Lars?
I'm going to close with a book recommendation. Actually, it's a very short, easy book. It's called "Steal Like an Artist" by Austin Kleon, who himself is an artist. It's a Kleon. It's a short read. You'll finish it in 30 minutes, like really, really short. But to me, I read that and I think it was a perfect reflection of what's happening in employer branding, right? Like nobody's original. Very few people are original. We're all building things that are taking pieces of inspiration from other people's work, from outside muses, right? Marketing, creative, whatever it might be. So it's this idea of get as many muses as you can, absorb as much as you can. And it talks about like good theft and bad theft. Good theft is always credit the source, always talk about where things come from. Steal from many, don't steal from one. But I think if you're working in employer brand, there's so much inspiration out there to be found that this book, I think, really helps give you a lens through which to consume that content that I think will make you much more impactful. So, and I don't have any royalties for the book, but it's just a really good book. I don't make a lot of book recommendations, but Steal Like an Artist is one.
I was definitely expecting you to recommend a certain yellow book that you're going to hold up, but it was a certain book that a certain somebody wrote about EB.
Yeah, no, anyway, that's also a good book, but I would be it would be a shyster if I was on here hawking my book. So yes.
I was shocked when I was like,
you're really going to use his closing thoughts to pitch his book? Damn.
I was like,
no. That's cool. Okay, well, look.
But now I just pitched your book for you.
That would have been done through me, so I appreciate that being done through you.
Plan there.
I'm just teasing, but it is a book that everyone should also read. So I would be remiss to not mention.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff.
Brilliant. Well, look, Stacey, Lars, thank you very much. That's absolutely really welcome all your thoughts, Stacey. Absolutely brilliant. And thanks everybody on the right side and side for your questions. Even mention of Scrappy Doo on the right hand side there, which is, I don't know where that came from. Engage your inner Scrappy Doo. I think that's the alternative to the MacGyver theory. But So yeah, so look, thanks for everybody. Next week is, as I said, Carmel Collins from Cisco talking about employee-generated content at Cisco and how they built trust into that. I'm also looking for another guest who might be able to talk about that subject. So if anybody's got any suggestions of somebody who's trying to do some stuff in employee-generated content, that would be really interesting to me.
I have a lead. I'll
Great
talk to you
stuff,
after.
Stacey. Thank you very much. So look, thanks for everybody,
Bye,
and really appreciate your input, and take care. Have a great week.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for having us,
Good
Steve.
chatting, guys.
See you, Stacey.
Thank you, Steve. Bye,
See ya.
Lars. Bye.